Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to On the Pen, the weekly dose for this Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024. You are on the pen. Welcome. Thank you for being here with me today. We've got some breaking news to get into as it relates to the American Diabetes Association coming out strongly against compound GLP-1 products. We're going to get into all of it in a way that only On the Pen can. And we're going to get into that. We're also going to get into some interesting comments from a past FDA chair on compound medications. So this is going to be a very heavily weighted, no pun intended, on compound medications. If you're just joining us for the first time, I'm Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro, and we cover all things anti-obesity medicine, type 2 diabetes medicine, the current and future state of these treatments. And we cover the breaking news around them in a way that's patient-centric, right? Most of the information that flows out, it flows out for the investor community or it flows out for the medical community. We take all of that here and we put it in a patient-centric way, in a way that helps you as patients go have more competent and confident conversations with your medical providing team. But let's get into it. So the American Diabetes Association, which does yeoman's work in many, many things. They've done yeoman's work in advancing equitable access to insulin, affordable access to insulin. They've done a ton of work in making sure that patients who are in the schools or in the workplace get treated fairly and accommodated according to the diseases that they live with. They've done amazing work with the Affordable Care Act to make sure that people got access to their treatment and weren't discriminated against based on pre-existing conditions. And they're a trusted source. When they speak on the topic of diabetes, people listen. They're a trusted source. And so this is not an anti-American Diabetes Association rant, but this is a rant. Because what they've done here with the compounds and being vehemently anti-compound, I think is extremely detrimental and has the potential to tarnish their reputation and standing with people living with diabetes. So they released a statement yesterday on compounds. They said, today the American Diabetes Association released guidance statement on the use of compounded GLP-1 and dual GLP-1 GIP, that's tirzepatide, medication classes. The statement recommends against using non-Food and Drug Administration approved compounded GLP-1s and dual GIP/GLP-1 receptor agonist products due to uncertainty about their content, safety, quality, and effectiveness. Now, there's more than is on the surface here, and that's what I want to get into today, because many of you may be hearing this and thinking, aren't most people living with diabetes on the branded medication? And you would be correct. I believe it's somewhere in the ballpark of 80+% for both Ozempic and Manjaro, the medications referenced in this statement by the ADA. More than 80% of people in the United States have access via their formulary to one of these medications, and people even on Medicare and Medicaid have pretty good access to these medications. So you would be correct. And so the statement is really timed, I believe, to do something for the business purposes of the American Diabetes Association. Now, basically what you see here is the American Diabetes Association has to position themselves a little bit differently for growth in the future. We've seen now both with Ozempic studies, the SELECT trials, which were 4-year-long studies, the longest studies in GLP-1s. And then we saw a 3-year study with tirzepatide. Both of these studies show that the overwhelming percent, almost everybody in these trials who were pre-diabetic, did not develop diabetes. So if we have advanced medical treatments today to the point where people with prediabetes have the ability to not become diabetic by virtue of taking these incretin mimetic therapies, well, that really puts a hole in the future growth of the American Diabetes Association, because then they would become more advocates for type 1, which is a little bit more rare, still super important. But when you think about the future growth of the American Diabetes Association, they have to pivot. And where are they pivoting to? This is why you follow On the Pen, because we're privileged to the insiders conversations about this. We talk to high level people in high levels of big pharma, people in high levels in the media, and within these organizations. And what we're hearing is that the American Diabetes Association is really starting to pivot towards obesity. Why? Because that is where the future medications are in treating obesity. Type 2 diabetes could become something that is a real problem of the past. And that's amazing. And it could become a problem of the past, largely in part to the work of the American Diabetes Association. So I think it's just important to understand that I believe what you're seeing here is a parroting of big pharma lines, because they know that if they're going to grow in the obesity space, they have to be in the good graces of Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. They have had years to make these statements, but they wait until it's in the public discourse to maximize the effectiveness of their statement for the benefit of these pharmaceutical companies, who they need if they're going to grow in the obesity space. That is my take on what I believe is going on here with the with the American Diabetes Association. Now, I believe that this move to come out anti-compound is ultimately something that really, really puts in jeopardy people's trust in an association like the American Diabetes Association. Point in case, one of the things that we've learned here in the past couple of weeks as the Outsourcing Facilities Association battles with the FDA and court over the tirzepatide shortage is that 80 million plus prescriptions of compounded semaglutide were filled last year alone. 80 million prescriptions. Now, if there was a massive problem, an intrinsic problem with safety and efficacy of compound GLP-1s, don't you think in 80 million prescriptions, we would have seen it? The answer is yes, we would have. It's common sense. We would have seen it. If you look at the FAERS database, and we've covered this extensively at onthepen.com, if you look at the FAERS database, there are far more reports in the FAERS database for the branded version of Ozempic than there is for compounded medications. There are a ton. So to say that somehow Big Pharma is exempt from some of these criticisms is absolutely preposterous and ridiculous. And this is the type of thing that runs the risk of tarnishing the reputation of somebody like, or an organization like the American Diabetes Association, who, again, has done yeoman's work in making sure that that type 2 diabetes could become a thing of the past, that people with type 1 diabetes have fair and affordable access to the medication they rely on to live. They've done great things, but this is not one of them. This is not one of them. This is a placation to the money that props up the things that they do. And that's, as a patient, from the patient perspective, that is too bad. That is really too bad. Because what we have seen is that we've seen numbers of obesity drop for the first time in my lifetime. We've seen amazing things happen when people simply have affordable access to these medications. Now, the compounds aren't about affordability, they're about accessibility, but affordability has also been a byproduct because many, many people are priced out of these therapies simply because of the system that we're in here in the United States. So we are vehemently pro 503B compound versions of these medications. 503Bs were established by the government to make sure we as patients have a backstop to medications when they are in short supply. And we've heard from Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly's own mouths that they will not be able to meet the demand for these medications in the near term. With 100 million people in the US alone, living with the disease of obesity, not to mention the billions of people around the world, probably over 1 billion people worldwide living with obesity. And you see these companies, both Lilly and Novo, furiously running to open and launch in new markets, least of these China, India. We have seen now these medications drop in some of the largest markets in the world. They are not going to be able to serve everyone. 503Bs in this country should remain a critical access point for these anti-obesity medications. If we're going to get serious about fighting the disease of obesity, this has to be an all hands on deck approach. And when the American Diabetes Association leverages their might and leverages their influence to come out against compounds in this way that simply just parrots the lines of the big pharmaceutical companies, it is extremely disingenuous to the battle of eradicating the disease of obesity in the United States. If we're going to get serious about this, we have to be serious, and we have to have a serious conversation about the important role of 503B pharmacies in this country. And 503B pharmacies, for the record, while the product is not FDA approved, the active pharmaceutical ingredient used in a 503B compounded pharmacy has to be sourced from an FDA approved facility. So the API is coming from somewhere that is FDA approved. Second of all, 503B pharmacies must conform to the current goods and manufacturing process, which is overseen by what? That's right, the FDA. So while they're not FDA approved, there is oversight there from the FDA. This is not hearkening back to some of the injectable 503As that lack sterility, or that you even see in some news reports lately about different med spas maybe getting shut down because of dirty compounds. The idea that we're just going to lump all compounds into the same bucket and we're going to talk about compounds from 503B at the same time that we're actually talking about gray market peptides that come from overseas that are not for human consumption. That's what's happening here. And we've been warning you for 2 years that this was going to happen eventually, and it's very predictable, right? And that's exactly what they're doing. So this is a very frustrating move by the American Diabetes Association to leverage their influence and scare people against good options, 503B compounded options. Continuing on the conversation about compounds, Mr. Scott Gottlieb was on MSNBC yesterday. Scott Gottlieb used to be the former head of the FDA, and he was being asked about essentially compounded medications. So Mr. Gottlieb left the FDA, currently serves on the board at Pfizer. And we're going to bring you his interview courtesy of MSNBC, talking about the future impact of the Trump administration on the GLP-1 markets. Let's take a listen.
For more on the key developments in the space to watch, we're joined by former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is a CNBC contributor, serves on the board of Pfizer as well. Dr. Gottlieb, great to see you here in person. Welcome to Fast Money.
Thanks a lot.
The last time I specifically talked to you about weight loss drugs was a while ago, maybe a year ago even. And so I'm wondering what you think of the ramp. The last time we chatted, you said that it was a promising space akin to statins, but now we're seeing some, I don't want to say evidence, but maybe some data points, some concerns that the growth trajectory isn't there, the demand isn't keeping up. What's your take?
Yeah, look, I think if you look back to when we spoke, probably more than a year ago, I would have had an expectation that they would have grown more quickly. But I think as new indications come on these labels, certainly the indication around cardiovascular risk was a real inflection point. I think in the coming year, you're going to see new indications get on these labels, maybe for sleep apnea, musculoskeletal diseases. And there's also going to be a big data card that gets turned over by Novo Nordisk around reduction of signs and symptoms of dementia. And if that's positive, and there's some indication from smaller trials that could be a positive study, I think that's going to be another big inflection point. And so I think that the future looks very promising for these drugs from a public health standpoint.
How do you see anything changing in terms of your expected trajectory, just absent political wins, and when the new administration comes, and whether or not anything will change, just because we know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is more sort of, he endorses more nutrition and is in favor of those sorts of interventions as opposed to medications?
Yeah, look, I don't think the public health need is going to change. We've seen some comments generally around excess utilization, so marginal utilization and maybe too much utilization among children. I think when you look at the actual data, the average BMI of patients who are on Lilly's drug is around 37. The average BMI of people who are on Wegovy, which is Novo Nordisk's drug, is 38. That's quite high. That's about 290 pounds in a 6-foot male. So that's class 2 obesity. So that's not marginal utilization. That's people who are properly indicated for this drug. And
so what I want to camp out on there is the fact that basically what Mr. Gottlieb, again, a board member of Pfizer, formerly the head of the FDA, kind of interesting where these heads of the FDA go right after they're in the FDA, where if you ever wonder if there's maybe any conflict of interest between what the FDA decides and Big Pharma decides. What happened when Scott Gottlieb was the head of the FDA? Obviously, Pfizer got the COVID vaccine. He leaves the FDA. Now he serves on the board at Pfizer. Just another one of those points where you go, But anyways, 37 and 38 being the respective BMIs for Wegovy and Zepbound average, basically indicating that these are the people that deserve the medication. While people who have a lower BMI, I believe he goes on to say that with compounds, the average BMI is 30, that those people are somehow undeserving because they have a lower BMI. This is ridiculous and nonsensical. And sort of, I just wanted to underscore this because I think this is all interesting conversation, considering that this past week, Eli Lilly also changed the package insert for Zepbound to remove the BMI requirement altogether because medicine is moving away from the BMI as it is. But the point that I'm trying to make here ultimately is that people who have the disease of obesity deserve to be treated regardless of the severity of their disease. And so if compound medications are existing to fill the gaps to help people with the lower BMI, great, because obviously the big dogs can't take care of them. And so it just kind of serves to underscore the point of this entire podcast that 503B medications, 503B compounded medications especially deserve to exist in the face of an FDA shortage. And when the FDA shortage exists, 503A should be able to work with those 503Bs to fill safe and efficacious medication to people who need it. So those are the points that I wanted to make today. Thank you for being here with me on this podcast. Thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star rating and review. And we'll catch you later in the week for On the Pen Live Thursday night, 9 p.m. Central. We'll see you there.